So Xiaoli, there's a question that many people, I'm actually going to read it because many people upvoted it. So food security is at a crisis point in many parts of the world, even in first world communities. We're all vulnerable when food does not reach the global community. Infrastructure systems in many countries have collapsed as supply chains struggle to stay operational. As our global community works through the pandemic of COVID-19, do you envision more empathetic global coordination of food supply or more focus on domestic food protectionist policy? So that's for you, Xiaoli, to take a crack at.
Thank you for the question from the participants. So I think in terms of food supply globally, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we do see there are countries who said that they are gonna temporarily suspend the food exportation. But I think that one, I think that go away, I think for most of the countries now. And I think globally, maybe in terms of grain, I think there will be more coordination, but in terms of meat production, meat import, I think there will also be coordination, but really the global protection, trade protection from different countries is really unfortunate. But we can see in this trade war between US and China in this round, China actually increased a lot of trade imports in the first quarter of this year. So I think there will be global coordination on food supply, and that's my main conclusion.
Yeah, I would note, thanks for that. I would note that that policy coordination issue is something we'll focus on a lot in Thursday's session with James Rood and our colleague from IFPRI. Many people pointed out that sort of, I may think, surprising to see the kind of rapid bounce back, the evidence of rapid bounce back we're seeing in China. And I think Sandeep had a slide from the IMF and World Bank projections of increase in growth in 2021 as well, you know, from negative to higher than before. And I wonder whether you think, there's a question about whether you think the bounce back in China is what we might expect in other countries, or whether there are unique conditions in China maybe going into the epidemic, the pandemic, that is special in China relative to other countries.
There's really a lot of uncertainty there. So we see a little bit of recovery in China now for its economy. The government is really trying to implement a lot of very restrictive measures to make sure that the economy can go back. But I think it really depends on how the rest of the world is doing, given now that China is really having its economy also highly depend on the global economy. So if it gets really very quickly better in other parts of the world, in Europe, North America and South America, then I think the economy in China will bounce back. But however, if this is very long, this stayed very long in other parts of the world, then maybe China will experience those other types, for example, the U type or the W type. So I think it really depends. There's a lot of uncertainties there.
Good, thank you. So I think one last question for you for this round. I think there's a lot of interest in what you showed us, the slide of the farmers market that had the meat products there without refrigeration, and just thinking generally about the kind of the meat sector in China compared to what we see in North America? So in North America, we've seen the food processing, the meat processing industry being perhaps the most vulnerable part of the whole food system. And people wonder about that in the China context.
So it's definitely affected. A lot of a lot of the government suspended a lot of meat processing during the pandemic. But as I said, because of the African swine fever, the pork production is already at its lowest level. And if there's a slide where I showed a link to an article posted on FAO website. If you go there, there's actually a more detailed description there that the government actually divided the different cities into different risk levels. So for those low risk level cities, the meat processing, like they allow the meat processing to go back immediately. And then, so it's able to recover pretty healthy, I would say that. So that's a little bit different from the US and Canadian context.
I think I'll just ask you one more question here is that I also had, that many of the participants have, is can you tell us about this tiers of cities? You talked about different tiers of cities, and I think that was new language for many of us.
Yes, so basically the first tier cities, there's 4 cities there: Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. So those are the most developed cities in China. And in those cities, you will see the fresh food e-commerce is more popular. And in those cities, if you live in 3 kilometers of where the fresh food e-commerce, they have a storefront there, then they commit to deliver your food within 30 minutes, at least by Hema. Or other platforms, maybe like 1 hour, and they also allow you to have scheduled delivery. And I ask my friends that most platforms are able to deliver food at least the next day now. So during pandemic, it's a little bit longer, but it's much shorter than here. And the new first tier cities, I think now there are 18 or 20. So those are the cities that is a little bit less development than those Beijing, Shanghai, but still they have large population base there. And the 5th tier city are probably like the cities in my province. They're not that developed, but still they are a big city. There, I didn't list a lot of like the villages or the towns. They are not listed there. So those are the different tiers of cities.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to switch over to Sandeep, and I'm trying to pull out the questions there. These ones are a little bit less clear. So here's one question. How can any of these models help in cases where there is endemic discrimination that is culturally derived? How can a model change something like that that has been ingrained for centuries? So I guess that's a question about what do we get from the model that can help us with the way that, say, governments or others might respond to the crisis?
Yeah, that's actually the point of the model. So think about an extreme case. If I understand it correctly, there are norms and customs that are followed for centuries. If you're talking about gender differences, how can a model change that?
That's part of the question, yes. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what the model is saying, that those things are unknown. Those channels are unknown, how strong norms are, as opposed to policies for information about gender equality and things. So the model doesn't attempt to change anything. The model wants to capture those impacts and say, at the end of the day, when the dust settles after a contraction, due to all the different forces, which the question addresses one of those forces, that is norms and customs, at the end of the day, what is women's response? So it's not changing anything. It's trying to capture things like that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask a couple questions. So you noted a really long and severe impact on sanitation in the South Asia context from the financial effects. I wonder if you could speculate on why that might be.
That I don't know. I mean, there is a specific answer to that, right? But I would think just the cost of accessing safe sanitation services on one hand, and the breakdown of government services during a crisis, which we see even in developed countries, the two forces together can create that lack of access.
So maybe just to continue that. So what we've talked about sort of bounce back effect also with Xiaoli and all, we see these projections of sort of things bouncing back within a year or so. You're showing us these 10-year lags, some of them actually getting worse and worse over a 10-year period. So what do you think is kind of the mechanisms that we might otherwise not be thinking about? So you have these such long effects, such long lagged effects.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this model, the effects of this, what it does is that it takes a snapshot of the economy, right, between 1991 and 2019, right? It takes a snapshot of that and then simulates what happens when there's a GDP contraction, okay? So when it says 10 years, it's different than showing a graph actually falling for it. It's just telling you that given how these economies work with their culture, with their economic policies, with the recovery policies, everything, if things continue like that, what would happen over a 10-year horizon? So on one hand, yes, it is a 10-year horizon, but on the other hand, it's telling you that these effects are very, very persistent. Right? And what in terms of COVID-19, if that's the last part of your question, then there has to be particular attention paid to the fact that women's unemployment or getting out of the labor market is way more persistent than men's, right? And so that tells you that there are very different set of policies that have to be addressed towards girls' education and schooling and labor markets than simple recovery stimulation type of policies which would get men back on their feet.
Okay, I'm just looking at the time. Maybe I can try a question, see if I can find a question that's for both of you. I'm sorry, I'm just looking through.
I see an interesting question about long-term effects of sanitation in case you're looking for a question.
Well, go ahead then. Maybe you can read the question, Sandeep. And I have a question for Xiaoli as well.
Sandeep, if access to sanitation water continues on a negative trend for greater than 10 years, how does that correlate with longer-term economic impact? This is from Jessica. That's really interesting. A very specific answer to that is if you lose access to sanitation, that directly has implications about the spread of COVID-19, right? So, and we know that infection rate has long-term economic impacts, and that's what we have been talking about. That's one. But even in the absence of COVID-19, an interesting finding in a recent study is that this access to sanitation is very highly correlated with children's growth and stunting, and that's on the channel for affecting long-term growth, which is why this indicator is so important to begin with, even before COVID came in.
Okay, so I think we've reached the time is now 1:20, which is our promised end to this. So I'd like to just finish off by saying thank you so much for Sandeep and Xiaoli for these great presentations. Really eye-opening, both this historical perspective Sandeep provided us as a way of projecting these gendered effects going forward, and Xiaoli, this kind of shorter term horizon as well that you've provided to us, which is learning more about the digital economy and its penetration in China and overall changes in the food system. So thank you very much. I would just say to everyone that we have our sixth and last session this Thursday, which is going to be about policy, the importance, critical role of coordinated policy action. Same time, same place, as I say. And immediately after that, then, if you can check eClass on your participation in the different events and the certificate that we have there, you will be able to follow the instructions that I provided in an announcement about how you can print off your certificate if you've participated in the course as expected. So with that, we will sign off and I wish everyone a healthy week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.